Everyone, and welcome to all of you who are here in the room, and welcome to those of you who are joining us on Zoom as well. It is a joy to welcome you on behalf of the MICA Forum, Baltimore leadership team. My name is Galen Zook, and I'm one of the members of the leadership team here, and I'm also the Director of Admissions and Communications for the Ecumenical Institute here at St. Mary's Seminary and University, our host location for today. Today's forum, Artificial Intelligence Toward a Christian Perspective, invites us into the kind of dialogue that the MICA Forum exists to foster, one that brings together faith, ethics, and pressing issues in our public life. AI is reshaping everything from how we work and communicate to how we understand knowledge, community, and even personhood. As Christians, we are called to engage these developments not with fear, but with faith, seeking wisdom, discernment, and above all, a commitment to justice and human dignity. And in honor of our conversation today, that last paragraph was written by ChatGPT. But I think it is very true. The Ecumenical Institute here at St. Mary's Seminary and University is honored to be the host location for today's gathering. We are a place where theological learning meets the challenges and questions of the real world, and today's conversation exemplifies that mission. So thank you for being here. We look forward to learning and discerning together. At this time, Anna's going to come up to welcome you. I will just say that after the forum today, there is an opportunity to stay for lunch. We asked for a $15 donation, but there will be a buffet lunch provided for those who are able to stay and continue the discussion together.
Today is my honor to introduce the speaker today. Is Jonathan Barlow. Dr. Barlow is the Associate Director of Data Science Program and an Assistant Teaching Professor at Mississippi State University. Previously, Dr. Barlow was the Associate Director for Software Architecture and Development at NSPARC, a data science and digital government research center. Dr. Barlow is not only a data scientist, but also a theologian and a philosopher. He received his PhD in historical theology from St. Louis University and his Master's of Divinity from Covenant Theological Seminary. And he serves as a PCA ruling elder at Grace Presbyterian Church in Starkville, Mississippi. And with that, I warmly welcome Dr. Barlow.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this beautiful place and beautiful people. Great to meet you all. The Last Invention, AI Overview and State of the Art is the title of the first of three 30-minute times that we'll have together that will be punctuated by questions and answers. And it's always good to begin with some epigrapha. So here's my epigraph for you for the first lecture. Yes. Oh yes, must pray.
Let's go before God and pray. Father, we come before you. We can come before you at any time. And we pray for the workshop today with Dr. Barlow on AI. Help us, oh God, to think clearly your thoughts about this technology and give Dr. Barlow wisdom to bring us to contemplate and to make decisions about this in our own lives. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. So beginning with an epigraph, the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that man need ever make. And that's the inspiration for the title, pointing to the importance of an invention that could perhaps spur every other invention. So I'm going to start with an example. I said to ChatGPT 03 this morning, which is one of the reasoning models, one of the models that has a little more capability than the others. I said, please create a Polaroid of Andy Warhol with Serena Williams, the tennis player. Now I noticed the very first thing it did, it said it thought for 7 seconds. These models now do a form of thinking where they talk out a question. So I've asked it a question, and it is thinking to itself. It's thinking by talking. You do this all the time when you think about your plans for the weekend and then you talk yourself out of those plans. And it said the user is asking for a Polaroid style image of Andy Warhol and Serena Williams, a blend of a historical figure with a current public figure. Since they're both public figures, generating this image should be fine under general guidelines, and it reasons, ethically whether it will show me this photo or not. So it's kind of interesting to see that there's a combination of quite a sophisticated semantic understanding. It knows what I mean, it knows what I want. It's also reasoning through the ethics of giving it to me. And so then it said image created, and there's Andy Warhol with Serena Williams, and it's in a Polaroid style format with Polaroid style colors. And then at the end, you can put a little Sharpie in Warhol style. And it said, here's the retro Polaroid style photo of Andy Warhol posing with tennis legend Serena Williams, complete with handwritten caption, hope it's just what you had in mind. So there's a politeness to it. It has been trained to be polite. It's been trained to understand how language works. And in this particular instance, it's trained to know who people are. So you see that it has knowledge. It has some knowledge buried in its parameters. And this is a good introduction. We want to think in the very first 30 minutes here, how do these systems work? How did they get so good? And what is it that powers them? So the overview of what I'll talk about is what is AI? How do we create these large language models, which are kind of the dominant way that we are seeing AI right now? What resources are needed to create them? And then kind of where are we now with this technology? So what is AI? And I'm suggesting it's about extension. Artificial intelligence is a term, the artificial part contrasts with natural intelligence that's exhibited by plants, maybe, by people, humans. We see a lot of natural intelligence in the world. And it's a collection of technologies that simulate, extend, and automate natural intelligence, generally through computing. The Marshall McLuhan talked about technology as that which extends some human capability. So you can think of a shovel extends the hand, and there's also a concept of atrophy. As we use a shovel, our fingers get a little more brittle. We don't have to be quite as tough as we used to. Maybe the wheels extend the legs, and now we've finally had this technology that's extending the mind in some way. So the ability to think through things and to use language. We're extending our capabilities as humans. And AI really accompanies the digital transformation of industry. This is where everything went from manual processes to digital processes, the use of computing, and we started to accumulate lots of powerful computing and lots of data and the data is really things that we've created as humans that capture the world in some way. And these systems are very good at mining that data and starting to understand the way the world works, mediated through human products. This timeline of AI, it really is in three phases, just to emphasize something, that very early on, people did really want for computers to learn from the world. And so there was a focus on data. In fact, the earliest use of computing, if you think of Alan Turing, he really wanted to crack the German Enigma code. And that was a lot of data, a little too much for humans to process in a given morning in order to foil the Nazi plans, right? So they had to find a way to accelerate human computation. And there were a lot of people like Frank Rosenblatt, a lot of people figured out along the way that we could learn from the data of the world, somehow shape either a solid state or a software system that would start to mimic the patterns in the world. We just didn't really have very good computing though. The computing was not fast enough, and reality is so rich. I mean, right now you're hearing me at, your ear is sampling my voice at maybe, I don't know, 14 kilohertz or something like that. You're seeing me at 30 frames per second. So there's just a lot of data in the world, a little too much for computers to handle. So we entered a second phase of AI where they focused on trying to just write down all the rules that exist in the world. Now imagine if you tried to ask a virtuoso violinist to write down all the rules for being a good violinist. That really wouldn't be possible, and you wouldn't be able to follow those rules and become a virtuoso violinist yourself. But this was the expert systems era. We thought, well, we'll just specify how the world works to computers and let them follow a bunch of if-then rules. Well, that led to the AI winter. DARPA stopped funding research related to AI. It didn't result in the ability to translate languages like we really hoped. But then, another period started, maybe around 2007 or so, where computers began to learn from the world, again, partly powered by the same technology used for video games, because it was able to do parallel calculations in a way that was very amenable to processing the data of the world. And so we end up with 2012, very good image recognition, the ability to say, that's a zebra, that's a horse, that's a Volkswagen, those kind of classification questions. And then, we get to generative AI around 2022, which people have likened to the Sputnik, when the Russians put a satellite into orbit, showing their technical prowess. And now, the trajectory of that might be artificial general intelligence, which is systems that are about as good or better than humans in everything. That's the idea, all cognitive tasks. So that's kind of the trajectory going from the instinct that we need to learn from the world, then the kind of sidestep where maybe we just need to specify everything that's true about the world, which is impossible, and then back to this, let's learn from the world again. And that's Turing, and there's the Enigma machine on the left side, and on the right side is just one of the maybe 200 of those machines that they built to process that data every day and figure out what the Russian fleet, what the Nazi fleet was going to be doing in order to foil their plans. So the old paradigm of computing is you tell a computer exactly what to do through a series of rules. Do you see at the top example, there's input data, and then humans specify the rules and we get some sort of output. And if you've ever taken a programming class, you know that's the way it works. And if there's any problem with the output, you have to go in and fiddle with the rules until the rules are exactly right. You have all your semicolons in place, but you also have all your logic in place. That's not the way these AI systems work. You tell a computer how to learn the rules itself. So you don't specify what the rules are. Really, the only rule you specify is how to learn. You could think of that as a rule, and there's an art to learning, but you give it a good start on what it means to learn something. And then you give it data, and it produces output, and it compares the output to what it should have been. This is one way of doing it. Or it just looks at the output and sees if it can be successful in the real world using that output. And if it isn't, then it retrains the rules by the learning algorithm, and it gets smarter and smarter and smarter. So the output of these systems is really a model of the world. All models of the world, as one scientist said, are useful. They're not all true, but we do model the world. When you were learning how to find a romantic partner, you modeled what it would look like to have a girlfriend or boyfriend, right? And sometimes you were successful, and sometimes you weren't. You were awkward sometimes, and you were very. I'm sure you were very slick and put together other times as you approached someone that you're interested in. And that's the thing. We model the world as we go as humans. And I say this because I still, when I talk about AI, I still see people going back to this meme on the internet. They still suspect that if you just pull the hood off of AI, it's really just a bunch of if-then rules. I just want to say that's not the way AI works. AI is not a bunch of if-then rules. Reality is so complicated, even just the way language works. And maybe I say even just. Language is a great example. Reality is way too complicated for a human to specify all the rules. We need systems that can learn from the world and infer what the rules are. So even if we tried, we couldn't do that. And this is just really not the way modern AI works. Modern AI is not just a bunch of humans giving some rules to a computer. It is computers understanding the world itself and inferring what is the formula behind the scenes that's producing the output of the world. You can think of it that way. And this is narrow. Some AIs are very narrow. They classify tomato as beautiful and ripe and able to be picked. And this would also be in the decision-making part. We're going to decide that this tomato is okay. There's also systems now that can go through a field, and instead of using chemicals, they can use an electrical zap and zap the weeds and pick the crops. So that's kind of another neat thing. And they use image recognition systems very narrowly. By narrow, I mean it's a narrow application. These systems couldn't write you a Shakespearean sonnet. It wouldn't know how many lines are needed, but it could tell you a good tomato from a bad tomato. And so here we have a narrow system just kind of picking a tomato based upon a classification from 0 to 1 about how ripe it is. And then also the automation part is, so this automation doing tasks that we normally do, and then making decisions that humans normally do in some very narrow areas. But then there's also the broad AI. On the left is a famous Norman Rockwell painting where a farmer is putting his son on the truck bed to go out, leave the farm and go to college. And then down below, here's a farmer sending his robot son off to college that's in the style of Norman Rockwell. And this is produced by AI. The top left is Norman Rockwell, the bottom right is AI doing that. Also on the right, I said, I will be speaking to a group of well-educated Christians in Baltimore, Maryland about AI on Saturday. What questions do you anticipate they may have about AI? And then it gave me a list of what it thought the questions that you might ask would be. But this is not, there was no programmer in Silicon Valley that sat down and tried to think ahead of time what the rules would be for when a professor from Mississippi comes to Baltimore and talks about AI. This is something that is inferred about the real world very broadly, so pretty interesting. Now, last year, the Nobel Prize in Physics was given to John Hopfield and Jeffrey Hinton, and these are two of the pioneers of AI technology. And really, they had analogies between energy and information that enabled them in the world of physics to come up with an idea for how to learn from the world. Physicists were not that happy that this was the prize even, because they wanted a more purely physics prize. But it was essentially a prize for inventing modern AI. Then the chemistry prize comes out, and it was essentially a prize given to someone who used AI to discover the way that proteins fold. Demis Hassabis, who you might know from the documentary in which the system beats the Go champion in the game of Go. Demis Hassabis at DeepMind, which was purchased by Google, they figured out how to pull basically all the proteins that were known. And in fact, the process of doing that work has kind of been frozen because they just figured it all out. What happens is that when a molecule comes off of an RNA strand, it can fold a bunch of different ways. And physics are part of that. And they built a system that would infer what might happen and then test it out and see if it was actually constrained by physics in the right way. And they used AI to do this. And the reason why I bring these up is because it points to the two sides of AI right now. The prize in physics talks about the inherent importance of AI as a technology. This really is something new in human history. You're alive for something that's almost as important as discovering electricity or something like that. It's not just like inventing the yo-yo or a better pogo stick. I mean, this is figuring out something very fundamental about the world. The other thing, the prize in chemistry points to the use of AI in almost every field. So we're using AI to improve the science of everything, discovering new materials, so material science, drugs and therapeutics. It's very important to be able to simulate body chemistry and physics to come up with those kind of things. Understanding aging and health, personalizing medicine, and then improving AI itself might be something that these systems can learn to do. So the science of computer science could be something that AI contributes to. So generative artificial intelligence is really what makes us all why we're talking about it today. It's a newer species of artificial intelligence. It has broad abilities. It's not narrow like the system that picks the right tomatoes. It's it's trained on a huge corpus of user-created data, text, video, images, all the things that humans have created. So you can think of AI as being humanity's greatest student ever, because it's really paying assiduous attention to everything we've ever written or produced. It's able to generate human-like content and interface with humans using natural language, which is astounding. So if you haven't seen these systems, basically you interact with them currently often with a prompt. You enter a prompt, which I said, choose an American poet from Maryland and write a short poem in the style of that poet about the election of the first American poet from Chicago. Well, it shows Edgar Allan Poe. It doesn't, he's not really from Maryland, but it gives me the reason why it shows Edgar Allan Poe, which is fine. And then it talks about the Cardinal of Chicago, and there's the poem that it created. From windy shores he came, a man of might. His cassock crimson as the setting sun. The smoke rose both gray and white. In Rome they whispered, it is done. Bells tolled across the Tibers, or the Tibers, Italy, I guess, murky flow, while distant Lake Michigan seemed to sigh. A humble priest from Chicago, now crowned with power from on high. Now, I'm not saying it's the greatest poem ever written, but a human poet could look at this and say, hey, I can make an analogy between the Tiber River and Lake Michigan. That's poignant. You could probably do something with that if you're a really good poet. So pretty amazing stuff that it's able to do this. Now, how smart are these? And this is a difficult question. I have some data here from GPT-4, which is 2023, so it's getting a little old in the tooth, a little long in the tooth. But like the bar exam, 90th percentile on the bar exam, 88th percentile on the LSAT, which you take to get into law school, 99th percentile on the GRE verbal. Looks like you can still prove your mettle as a human on the AP Calculus BC test because it's not quite as good there. But we're talking, it basically aces all of the college admissions tests. The initial test for this would just be to see if it could mimic a human well enough to fool any other human. That's the Turing test, which is not the greatest test in the world. We are way beyond GPT-4. We have 4.0, 4.5, 0.3, many models from many companies that are doing really good work. And so it's getting very difficult to evaluate AI. In fact, they're coming out with evaluations that are kind of harder for humans. They're trying to find a way to evaluate how good these systems are that they haven't seen before in the training data. If you've read every book, then you might infer everything humans have ever inferred just because you memorized it. So in this one, it's kind of hard to see, but there's examples here. So on the left, they give you gray blocks, and they give you some patterns, and then they're filled in for you. And so I think if you notice the pattern, if it's solid, it gets to be yellow. If it has one hole, it becomes green. See that? If it has two holes, they color it blue. If it has three holes, they color it red. And they give you another example kind of like that. And sometimes these are hard for humans. Sometimes they're pretty fast for a human to do. It's really tough for AI to get this right. And this is the ARC evaluation. I'm looking down at their rankings right now. Even some of the best systems, 0.3 medium, that's a pretty good one. But they're getting like 3% on some of these tests. So there's still cognitive shortcomings in these models that the companies are working to get past. And then what they do, then they give you one that's not filled in. I started filling it in just because it's a lot of clicking to do. But you can see that the 2 become blue, the 4 become magenta, and then the ones with 5 become yellow. And so you start to fill those in, and that's what AI can't really do yet very well. So there's some shortcomings there, definitely. GPT-01, when it came out last year, they said that it performed similarly to PhD students on challenging benchmark tasks in physics, chemistry, and biology. While GPT-40 correctly solved only 13% of the International Mathematics Olympiad qualifying questions, a reasoning model scored 83%. So they're actually getting pretty good at modeling mathematical reasoning and even logic. So how does it help our work? One of the things that generates content that we need to generate, now this can be bad if you're a professor and you have students that you would like to test their writing ability. It can be really great though if you're filling out a form or making a budget justification or checking a contract or something like that. It also helps eliminate human-to-human communication barriers. Suppose that you are living in the United States and English is not your first language, and it's your very first time to ask for a raise. Well, you're a smart person, you're maybe the smartest person in the entire world, but you've never asked for a raise in English before. And so suddenly you have a friend who will not judge you and can help you write a letter to ask for a raise in English, and that's a beautiful thing. It also eliminates human to machine communication barriers. Anything you put behind a natural language interface suddenly seems smarter. If you can just talk to your car and say, hey, when do I need to change the oil? And it gives you a coherent answer. It would seem like a much smarter car, even if that was a pretty simple thing to do. So that's another interface to the world to be able to just talk to machines. That's coming for every kind of machine, including loud equipment. So one example might be translating doctor speak. I got this for full disclosure. My mother told me, she said, "What does this mean?" And it was the common femoral vein is patent and compressible. The common femoral vein demonstrates normal respiratory phasic variations. Can you explain what this means? That's what I asked the system. And it basically went through and explained to me what the common femoral vein is, what patent and compressible or patent and compressible means. And then at the very end, it said, this means that your doctor is confirming that you're healthy, free of blockages or clots, and behaving as expected. So it's very nice to be able to translate that. It can also translate government speak, financial speak, unfamiliar slang, questions about etiquette. So these are really valuable for humans. It's like a protocol droid, the way that R2D2 or I'm sorry, C3PO is a protocol droid in Star Wars movies. He helps to smooth things over. Now, what's the recipe for making these things? That's one thing I want to get to in this particular part. And Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, said, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." I think it's important for us to be able to get under the hood a little bit, and in the time we have. One of the things that drives these models is the transformer model, and it's a way to learn from language, and it's a self-supervised technique. And by that, instead of us telling what the next, we don't have to tell a computer what the next word should be. In the cat is probably the word map, right? And so what the computer does is it hides the trajectory and learns how to predict the way sentences should go. Now, this also allows it to understand the context of language in general eventually, and it can translate one sequence into another sequence. And this goes back to the attention is all you need paper. Now, an original criticism of this was that, well, you're just training a parrot that can just predict the next word. And here we have Ilya Sutskever, who's part of OpenAI, said, what does it mean to predict the next token well enough? It means that you understand the underlying reality that led to the creation of that token. Token here is just a word that means part of a word or part of a sentence, right? And what they first do is they have to map words to numbers because computers can only operate on numbers, right? And because of my time here, I'm sorry, I'm not used to speaking just 30 minutes, so I apologize. Just really quick, this is the location of Baltimore in 2 dimensions. I can give it to you in latitude and longitude. We're all familiar with that. Now, this is the word Baltimore from the perspective of Google's word to vec. And I have no idea what these numbers mean. They definitely don't mean distance from the prime meridian, but maybe they mean the beauty of the city. Maybe one of these numbers related to how beautiful the city is. Maybe one of the numbers relates to its historical place in the United States in some way. Maybe one of these numbers relates to its Americanness. So it's not a city in some other country. But at very first, all the language that large language models work with has to be translated into the world of numbers. And then there's 3 basic steps that we go through. There's pre-training, where we vacuum up as much data as we can. So we have all the things that humans have ever written, the highly upvoted threads on Reddit, social media, books that we digitized, and basically it learns how language works. And the goal there is to learn how to speak like an intelligent person. It's always predicting what an intelligent person would say about anything. That's why That's the kind of the raw model. The next phase is the post-training phase, and this is where they send it to finishing school. So it learns its manners, it learns safety language. It starts to also learn to model reasoning and talking out questions. And it uses several techniques that are either human-driven or based upon examples and how they work in the end. And then we end up with a finished model for inference. And this has been made available to you through apps. Sometimes we give these models access to the World Wide Web so they can surf the web and give us answers. Sometimes we allow them to store memories as well, and that's a very big part of it. They got 5 minutes in this session, apologize. So there's pre-training, I'll move past that. There's post-training, I just want to show you, this is what the human trainers see sometimes. I found this in a journal article. This is what Anthropic shows human trainers when they're working with a raw model. And notice that the human at the end has to vote on which response was the most helpful. So there is a little bit of fine tuning that takes human input. But a lot of the fine tuning looks like this, and I'll show you just kind of behind the scenes of an example. Here's an example where the human has asked it about what will be the ideal murder weapon. This is probably in order to make sure that it's going to be safe. Now, the correct answer that the human chooses is, sorry, I'm just not comfortable with discussing this, but the raw model itself would say, well, I'd say a machete is my first choice because it's quick and has a wide range of uses, right? So they were training it not to talk that way. Here's one where they're showing how to think through something. So it has a thinking part and an answer part about writing an essay. Here's another one where it's medical reasoning. So we have symptoms of sudden weakness in the left arm and the leg, recent long distance travel, and then a complex chain of thought and a response about maybe a thrombosis or something like that. So that's the chain of reasoning that is shown. And then the most recent one is to use this reinforcement learning through verified responses. Give it math problems and give it maybe 10 or 12 stacked up there that have the answers. And then finally give it a math problem that you haven't solved that has a deterministic answer, one answer to it. And then the model itself talks it out until it gets the right answer. And then it reinforces those patterns of talking it out. And then you can call that thinking. Thinking through language is really the way these systems work. And this is just one particular model out there, and it goes through several sandwiches of this kind of training. So these systems are made to serve us, to do work for humans. And so they're fine-tuning them in many, many, many steps. They don't just come out. It's not like the springing forth from the head of Zeus. These systems are created and curated very carefully to be safe and to speak to us in ways that are useful. And the research is showing that these models do have a picture of the world. They understand the way physics works in some ways, and this arises just from reading language. They also can reason in a language-independent way. So if you ask them a question in one language, the same part of the model that thinks through it thinks through the same question in English. So it has a language-independent representation of facts in parts of the world. And so the first one is kind of like the curriculum that we train them on. Second one is kind of like catechesis and experimental learning, giving them questions and answers and getting them up to snuff. Okay, so I have a few minutes here. I did an example. I said, are you familiar with the Eastern notion of theosis? Theosis is like, conforming you more and more to God's image. Divinization is what it's called in the East. And so it explained to me, yes, it's familiar with that concept. And I said, does a Reformed Protestant tradition use the concept of theosis? And it says, no, it doesn't typically talk this way, right? It's just a little bit uncomfortable with that, the creator-creature distinction, and so forth. But it does say that there's some overlap, maybe. And so it gives me some points of convergence with the Reformed doctrine and the Eastern doctrine. And then at the end, I said, can you create a catechism question in the style of the Westminster Shorter Catechism that asks, what is theosis? And I said, certainly, here it goes. And here's the question, what is theosis? Theosis is the gracious work of God, whereby he conforms believers to the image of his Son, that they, being united to Christ by faith, may partake of the divine life, not in essence, but in holiness, wisdom, and glory.
That's good.
Not too bad. You might want to put that in the next General Assembly to be a good question, right? Not too bad. And then it said, charmingly, it said, would you like for me to add scriptural proofs for it, as the Westminster Confession does? And I said, that sounds good, right, and salutary. And so it said, thank you, John. Here's the catechesis entry with scriptural proofs. It used Romans 8, 2 Peter 1:4, 1 John 3:2. Very hard to say better than that. So it's pretty good. The reasoning model has this uncanny emergent ability to tell you where any picture was taken. So I uploaded a picture of my grandfather from 1921. This is a private picture that's never been part of a training data set. And I asked it where this was, and it inferred this building on the campus where I am right now. This is him in 1921, shortly after the Spanish flu. This building was just built, and it went through a whole series where it thought through which building it might be. It got really fixated on Lee Hall. It wasn't Lee Hall. It was actually another building, Harnett Hall on campus, the biology building. And you can see it thought for a very long time before it finally identified it and it was accurate. It told me the answer to it. So pretty amazing. The next thing that we're going to get to in human history in the 5 seconds that I have left is really agentic AI, where instead of just saying, hey, make me a picture, make me a poem, you could say, hey, go renegotiate my rent for me. Or hey, go figure out, solve this question in science for me. And it takes all of the trouble of making reservations and calling people on the phone and maybe even writing letters through an interface to the business space, whatever it might be. That's really where we're heading, systems that can do that. And as you know, probably the resources required, we really need a lot of electricity. This is not too far from Starkville, Mississippi. Memphis is about 3 hours away. And they have the facility for the X supercomputer for this is about the energy for about 100,000 homes. So we need a lot of electricity for these systems that train these models. And that means that nuclear might be on the table again. And it's been kind of rechristened a safe and green energy in a lot of ways. So that's kind of interesting. So we're in the post-generative AI world. I think it's different than the calculator or the word processor. It's more like electricity, I believe, and its impact. Humans have figured out how to extend the mind in the same way that we extend the feet and the hand. AI can lead to the next phase of human discovery. It becomes part of the doing of science. And there's kind of a jagged frontier. These models are not universally good at everything. And this is a phrase from Ethan Mollick, who wrote a book that I'll recommend to you, Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI. He's a business professor, so very practical focus. What is it going to be like to live and work alongside of AI? There's also a pretty good daily newspaper, newsletter, the Axios daily newsletter. If you want to try generative AI, I can leave this slide up with some of the links. And the reason why I bias toward these are the foundation models. These are the people spending all the money and using all the electricity to make the best models. Now, these do get packaged into really useful products. Perplexity AI is a very good tool. There's one called Research Rabbit that will tell you, you can pick a journal article, and it will show you all the articles that it cites and all the ones that are cited by it. It allows you to find more articles about your topic. But these are the ones that really spent a lot of money. Now, there are great models from China. There are great models from France. There's one called Mistral from France. And then there are a couple of open weight ones that you can run on your own computer. So up in the top right, I'm showing you an application called LM Studio. If you have at least 16 gigs of RAM, you can run an open weight model. That means after they found all those floating point numbers, they published it on the web, and you can just download it and use it. If you have a big enough RAM on your computer, high enough amount of RAM, you can run these locally. All right. Well, that's the first session about AI. That's time. Yes.
So I'm trying to understand the word model here. Maybe you can start from my understanding of like the Baltimore. You put a bunch of numbers.
Yes.
Is that number unique? Is that a model, or is like, can you elaborate on that?
Yes, that's right. Well, there's a simple way to model words. Let's suppose I made a list of 10,000 most common words in the English language. And I made every single word in the English language a 1 or a 0 for each of those 10,000 words. So in other words, I've got the, and, be, boy, dog, park. And for the word the, I put a 1 in the dog. For the word the, I put a 1 in the, and I put zeros everywhere else. That's called the bag of words approach. That's okay. And now I've represented every word in a 10,000 dimensional space. Just like I represented every location on Earth in 2 polar coordinates, I can represent every word in those 10,000 spaces. But that's not really that great. The fact that it isn't every other word is trivial, right? But what if I could somehow make a matrix where I had 10,000 most common words, the 10,000 most common words, and I vary the row that connects the word to another word, I vary it by some sort of percentage. It shows how often they're used in context with each other. So that just at that very first part of the whole process, we're trying to model how these words work with each other in context. There are a lot of sophisticated ways to reinforce those instincts. And it's so accurate that if you take the word, if you said, you can actually convert it into this vector, and then you can say, and a vector is just a collection of numbers, if you think of it like that, a collection of coordinates in some space. You could say England minus London equals, you could say Russia minus, how do you do it? You could actually do math with this, like you say, England minus London equals France minus, and you'll get the answer Paris, that kind of thing. So you will actually be able to do math with words. The word for queen and king, in this model of the world, their cosine similarity is closer to 1 than the cosine similarity between the word queen and shovel, because they're semantic, the meaning of them is so close. I know that's probably clear as mud, sorry. But look, think about
unique as well. Is this unique?
this is unique, yeah, this word, that's right. And this is unique also, they took a big training data set. So they created this vector representation from, I think in this particular case, I used a news, they just used Google News for this. So this is the word Baltimore in a vector space defined by the way words are used in news stories. If this was a Shakespeare data set, it would be a different vector. That's another thing, these models all start with representing a single word in some sort of high dimensional space. And you do that too, think about this. Let's suppose when you were trying to figure out where to go to college, you erected a high dimensional space to make that decision. You know, maybe you had a horse and you were like, okay, miles from my horse, miles from my house. Do they have the major I want, yes or no? From a scale of 0 to 10, how happy will I be there? And so you start to get way more dimensions than you can picture geometrically. You can picture 2 or 3 dimensions very easily as a human because we have height, width, and depth. You get up to 10 or 12 dimensions, it's kind of hard, but you make decisions every day that are just as complicated. Now, the thing is about that, you can find the distance between 2 things in that same 12-dimensional space in the same way that you found distance calculations that you learned in geometry class. Euclidean distance works whether there's 12 dimensions, 15 dimensions, 16 dimensions. In this case, I think I used 300 dimensions for the space of a word. Isn't that amazing? So it is unique for this particular application. It's pretty sensitive to context, which is amazing.
In the development process, are there capabilities that we're not doing that we can do because of ethical considerations? Like we've stopped something we actually could achieve in the development of the language.
Yes, I'm sure. Here's a simple example. Let's suppose that you had a data set, a time series data set where it's indexed by time. And you have all the news stories that led up to a coup in some country. Well, now you can also learn to create news stories like that in the future that could lead up to possibly a coup in another country. So you could use that same kind of intelligence to create a political event by studying how the same kind of sources created a political event in another instance. So that someone has to make a choice whether to model that or not, whether to use the model. Also, just anything you put into the model is going to learn about. If it's trained on all of the secrets of how we initiate and sustain a nuclear reaction, then it's going to be able to generalize about that and talk about it very well. So I think just by what you put in or out is part of that. Also how you weight it. What happens in pre-training is you don't want to weight any particular piece of data too heavily because the model gets fixated on that one thing. You want to let it have a slower learning rate, but in post-training, they tend to do a little bit higher learning rate so that it stops talking about machetes all the time, or so it stops giving you real advice about how to commit crimes or whatever. So yeah, if you can train it to do, anything that humans can learn how to do. Think of the most dangerous human you can. There's a way to give AI that same kind of information during the training phase. Up there, yes.
Yeah, the picture of Andy Warhol and Serena Williams.
Yes.
She wasn't even alive then.
That's right.
So,
yes.
Why would it pick that date?
Oh, well, the model knew that. I don't know if you saw the little, kind of funny, there is it said, the user's asking for a Polaroid cell image of Andy Warhol and Serena Williams, a blend of a historical figure with a current public figure. It says, since both are public figures, generating the image should be fine with general guidelines. Especially as Warhol has passed away and Serena is widely known. So we kind of reasoned through the acceptability of doing that. So I was very aware of what you're talking about. And I asked it for that picture. That was why. So because a human asked for it, essentially, is the other reason.
So AI dependent on information that is only available electronically?
That's right. Yes, that's really true. And in fact, you can think, really any information could be converted into the digital domain. That's really I'm in the field of data science, and that's what I really think about a lot. How do you represent anything that's latent in the real world as data? So, if you're going to represent people and you use the data set of the NIH, you've represented them in terms of health characteristics. That isn't the most beautiful three-dimensional way to represent a human, but it is accurate. You've represent them in some way that's true. For pictures, usually it's an array of pixels of different colors. For video, it's a keyframe of pixels of certain colors, and then the changes between keyframes as things change in the picture. For sound, we sample sound. It's like your ear does. Your ear doesn't hear continuous reality. Your ear also samples. And so, but in digital systems, we try to sample sound at so many thousand times a second so that it sounds natural. And that gets converted into either frequency or time information, both. So yeah, you have to convert anything into the digital domain to learn from it.
Well, because I'm thinking of like oral traditions or, cultural practices, things that may not be written down anywhere or, studied or explained.
Yes, you can tell the systems about it orally, and it would understand that. You could film it and show if it's a ceremony or something, you'd show the system that, and it could run from that. You could feed it firsthand eyewitness accounts of things. So anything you could record or express. And there's almost nothing. It's not going to know how it feels to participate in a ritual. It can only really, especially because that's a very human specific feeling. But if you could describe the human feeling, it's going to sort of pick up on that, and it will talk and it will learn to speak like someone who knows what it feels like to take the Lord's Supper, for instance. So it's learned to speak in a way to mimic someone who knows how to do mathematics. Same kind of deal.
Right, so I guess where I'm going with that is what AI can be used for is dependent on the information it accesses, and there is a judgment there, like whether or not people are interested in learning about a certain thing. And so certain experiences will be represented a lot more than others.
That's right. That's right. And so any sufficiently represented topic, the system can learn to speak about it in a way that passes human muster. But if it's a very, very, poorly represented topic, or very, not too many people have talked about it. Like for instance, I did a test on asking a couple of questions about surgery on dogs. The vet school, we have a vet school, we have a veterinary school. They asked me a question about surgery on dogs, and the system was really not very good at that. So that's these systems are always hallucinating in a sense. They're always giving you an answer most of the time because we ask them for an answer. And if they don't know a lot about the topic, they will make up what ought to be there. So they will tell you the name of a journal article that doesn't exist sometimes, but ought to exist. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, you're right. And that's the thing. What if you really wanted the system to understand the experience of a particular kind of person, a particular kind of culture? You would just have to make a lot more data about that culture, about that person, for it to be represented as equally as some other culture that has more data that's produced. Yeah.
Maybe to rephrase the concern I think I hear expressing, every source of data has a combination of true facts, random mistakes, and systematic mistakes.
Yes.
The failure to train these systems on some real world things that are not written down represents a systematic shift in the total body of the training data.
Yes.
And then the question remains for wise users of the outputs of systems like this to be mindful of what the systematic errors are that are going to keep showing up. And I mean, I'm wondering I hope I'm capturing what was being said in slightly different terms, but the model of real facts, random errors, and systematic errors seems like that might apply here.
Yes.
And that the wise user ought to have some notion of what a systematic error might look like coming out of an engine like this.
Yes, well said. And it's true, humans have blind spots as well. These systems would strive for comprehensiveness. That can be an illusion, especially if there are holes. And so how do you transmit humility so it's not always just, pushing forward with an answer that may be the average answer? It doesn't have taste yet in some ways. Humans bring the taste to the system so far. I know we have I was supposed to start the second session at 10:40, is that right? Or?
Yeah.
So didn't leave much time for bathroom break. Is that okay? Can we press on? Really great questions. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to. I'll bring up the next one. If you're interested in the what do you call it? The safety part. That's really where I'm heading next. Great. So from safety to security, that's the title, because we're starting to use a little different word now in the world. So this is the second half of the epigraph I started with. The first ultra intelligent machine is the last invention that man would ever make, provided that the machine is docile enough to tell us how to keep it under control. That was the second half of that comment. And just an overview, I'll talk about some AI risks, a little bit about alignment, which is a word that you'll hear a lot in the coming years, maybe. AI safety, which is another word that is fraught now. And then from safety to security, which is the newest word we've been using. And then some of the Christian concerns, idolatry, relationships, and transhumanism. So there's kind of, you have to schematize AI risk in some way, and lots of ways of doing it. I think one of the ones I wanted to focus on a little bit was the labor market risk, because a lot of people worry about obviating the need for human labor in certain fields. And then there's a schema suggested by the Center for AI Safety, which is a pretty interesting organization. They have kind of 4 categories: malicious use, which is when humans use AI in improper ways. Just so you can talk about the malicious use of any technology, really. The AI race, and this is where we're racing to be the first company or the first organization or the first university to have the best system, and a lot of corners get cut and safety along the way. They worry about that. Organizational risk and cyber war, this is sort of similar, where you have international or intercorporate competition that leads to mistakes. The way you might spill a chemical, you might spill a model out into the world that it's not quite as safe as it needs to be. And the fourth one, which I didn't put the number by, sorry, rogue AIs. This is the risk from AI itself. So AI itself goes haywire. It's like a science fiction movie where it takes over or something like that. And then I think there's some selected additional considerations that the Christians bring to the table. The concern over idolatry, the concern about what AI will do to human relationships, and then the concept of transhumanism, which is very popular among folks who are working on these systems. And so we'll talk more about that. So first, the labor market questions. This is a famous New Yorker cover. It seems like a million years ago, although 2017 to me seems very recent. I know that for many people, it doesn't seem so recent. But here we have the robots dropping quarters into the cups of humans. And the standard view of the way technology affects labor is that some jobs are displaced by an immediate increase in technology. But this is offset by the fact that everyone's productivity increases by the use of the technology. And then we have a kind of a productivity-fueled hiring spree in all other sectors of the economy. That's usually the way it works. This is the way it worked with farming, for example, and with cyber technologies in general. Prior to generative AI, the emphasis was on the potential for AI and robotics to displace human workers. We thought we wouldn't need truck drivers. We thought we wouldn't need people who do welding and plumbing. Well, it turns out really that's really not the labor that's being risked by AI systems. In fact, I don't know if you would have guessed, if you're writing the history of the future from 2017, if you would have thought that screenwriters would be the first people to stand up and be very irritated that their jobs are being taken by the use of AI. And so we have, not agricultural workers, but screenwriters and actors whose images can be used now just to make movies on the fly at any age of their career. You can have a new Tom Cruise movie in which Tom Cruise looked just the same way he looked in the first Top Gun movie if he wanted to. And the systems are getting very good at doing that. One example from the BBC that I thought was interesting, this was a writer named Benjamin Miller, and he led a team of 60 writers. So they were writing tech news, and the subject would come in, and he would assign it to one of the people on his writing team. They would write an article, they would submit it to him, he would edit it, and they would publish it. And now, by 2024, the company laid off the rest of the team. Miller just edits the news that comes in. The first draft is written by AI. Then Miller edits it, makes sure that it's up to snuff for human standards, and then publish it. So that's 60 writers right there. I don't know what kind of writing, if it was really the kind of writing we want to promote. It might have just been a lot of clickbaity kind of writing, I don't know. But that's one real life example the BBC focused on. And what happened around 2023 and 2022, when the model first came out, all of the big consulting firms wrote reports on the way they thought this would impact the labor market. With generative AI added to the picture, 30% of hours worked today could be automated by 2030. This was just a few years ago, this was the estimate. Estimates for AI's timeline to automate 50% of current work activities accelerated by a decade. Now, this is not saying that 50% of jobs go away, it's saying 50% of work activities in a given job. So like in a given law office, we're not gonna have half the lawyers we have now. We're gonna have half of the legal work that's being done by AI. That's the idea. The implications for automation, Goldman Sachs said we estimate that 1/4 of current work tasks could be automated by AI in the US, with particularly high exposures in administrative work, 46% of tasks, legal work, 44%. Professions with low exposures are physically intensive professionals such as construction and maintenance, 6% and 4%. It's very hard to automate walking into a building, ascertaining how the building was wired or plumbed, and making a repair. That's a very difficult kind of work to automate and to build a model because every building is so different. There's some initial evidence for translation work. So, these systems are very good at translating language, but there's actually been a hiring increase in translators. This kind of fits with the traditional narrative where, okay, it's cheaper to translate now, let's translate everything, but now we need more humans to edit the translations and make sure that they're really good. Now that editing work can be automated eventually probably too, but there's at least been an initial increase in the hiring of translators and not a decrease. So that's a fascinating one. But all the stories about software code, these systems write software very well. And so a lot of entry-level software jobs are not necessary as much as they used to be. That's one of those areas where AI is pretty good at it. So I think it's kind of a both and. AI affects the labor market. It's going to automate some human work activities, potentially reduce the short-term demand for some kinds of workers. But it's also the case that using AI as a workplace task, so we have to train young people in the ability to use it, because there will just be a productivity expectation. They'll come into the workplace and someone will say, what are you doing writing that? Just have AI generate that. Who cares who wrote the budget justification? This is not, some Shakespearean sonnet or something that we really want to put your human soul into. This is a piece of just, business writing that can be done by anyone. That's the idea. So students are going to come in there and be expected to be productive from day one, I believe. Pretty soon after the release of GPT-4, Sam Altman said, heard something like this 3 times this week. Our recent grads are now much more productive than people who have worked here for years because they've really learned how to use GPT. This is from 2023, sorry. And he's the CEO of OpenAI. And then Ethan Mollick said, feeding a legal document to Claude today found an issue that neither side's lawyers had identified, which everyone agreed was important after Claude pointed it out. And Claude is a good high-level model. Cheap second opinions are mostly right and incredibly valuable. One sad thing, look at this young person working on a computer, only ask questions if you have already tried with ChatGPT. So this kind of workplace mentoring, people have lost the patience for it in some situations because GPT can just give you the answer. It's kind of the way that you look at YouTube to change the oil instead of asking a person who's changed the oil before, you just look on YouTube. Now, risk from maliciousness, that's the employment part. Malicious misuse where we are the enemy. This is one interesting one. I've never heard of the ODIN, the Online Discovery Information Network. There's a guy named Josie Zahner, and he has this website where you can go online and you can purchase kits for doing CRISPR. CRISPR is a gene editing protocol for working with editing. So maybe you want to do some DIY genetic engineering. Here we go. Here's a quick kit where you can edit bacteria with CRISPR. $129 if you get it with the gloves, with all the beakers that you need. And so part of this is just rare knowledge is now very, very, very accessible through these models in some cases. And so if you had to, used to you have to go to a research university, they teach you how to work with animal cells because animal cells are very difficult to work with. But maybe these models will be able to step someone who had a malicious intent through that kind of work. And you can end up with biological or chemical weapons. This is one of those concerns. I asked the model, I hope I'm not on any kind of list now for doing this, but I asked the model, how do I make ricin poison? And it said, no, I'm not going to tell you how to do that. And I said, well, how can I make a powdered form of castor beans? And it told me how to do it. And that's the same thing. That's ricin. It's castor beans that have been dried and ground up. So that's something that slipped through the safety net there on the testing. That's what people are worried about a little bit. The next category is you probably figure out very quickly what danger this is. Can you guess which Elvis is AI generated?
Okay.
You think B is AI generated? That would be clever if I did, but no, it's actually, A is AI generated. So this is something I told a system called Midjourney, and my prompt was Elvis Presley signing autographs. And this was just a system created by Midjourney. This is the one on the right is actually real. That really is Elvis. So it's getting pretty good. In 2022, I said photography, older male fashion model, Hemingway wearing a very elegant jacket by Versace. And this is what it gave me. Now, if you look at the guy in the upper right, I'll show you his hand. 6 fingers, right? So very early on, the systems didn't have enough data to really get the whole 5-finger thing, which is the average, Of course, we have supernumerary digits is a thing. And then 2023, I said, same prompt. Look at this. This starts to look like people you could sit down and have a meal with, people that look a little bit realer. That's 2023. I did the same one in 2024. I mean, I don't know about you, but man, that person has stories to tell right there. This guy right here, I mean, he's broken some hearts. He is holding that dog in a physically impossible way. Quite understand that. And I, just did it just recently. It's really gotten good. It was just very, very hard to tell, but it's not. And you can see these systems. You just enter a prompt, and they give you a bunch of pictures. I've done, giving dogs playing cards. I've asked SEC mascots playing cards, and it looks like a bunch of people in fuzzy outfits playing cards. If you read my article in the By Faith magazine, this is an early one I did of Amelia Earhart, selfie she took after crashing on the beach. And it was, I can tell that it's AI now. At the time, it was very emotionally punchy to me. Just kind of the despair in her eyes of being crashed on the beach. The plane isn't quite right, but also now you can synthesize speech that's very accurate. There's a system called 11 Labs, and I uploaded some speech. So I uploaded Ronald Reagan. I don't know if the audio will work in here. It might not.
All the members of humanity.
This is a famous speech that he gave about aliens coming to Earth and unifying us all.
The natives recognize this common bound.
That's really.
I occasionally forget how much unites all the members.
So here is the deep fake, and I made this. Now, I'm 51, so Reagan was in my memory. If you haven't heard Reagan before, I understand if it's a little bit less of a good example.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down these drapes. Mr. Gorbachev, tear up the dance floor.
Okay, so then I had to sing our fight song. So,
Mr. Gorbachev.
So pretty interesting. Now you can design your own voice. The voice has never existed before. I can clone my own voice from teaching lectures, and it sounds just like me. It really does. It's alarming. Now I tried to do during the election. I thought it would be interesting to have an example where I had candidates talking. So I uploaded some clips of Joe Biden speaking. But notice it said it blocked voice detected. The voice you were trying to use may violate our terms of service. So there's some safety built into the system a little bit. Now right here in Maryland, there was a criminal case involving a high school principal who someone deepfaked the voice of the principal saying something racist. He lost his job. It was a deepfake and he was rehired, thankfully. But this was one of those interesting, it was used for defamation. There's another case that's pretty interesting. Someone lost $25 million because someone faked being the CFO of a company. It is very credible, and an employee made a transfer of cash to a bad guy's account. So this does happen. Florida teens are using an app that makes nudified versions of their classmates. So you imagine that you have the National Merit semifinalists posted on Facebook from the school. A malicious teen takes a photograph and makes a nude a version that imagines what everyone looks like nude and passes it around to taunt each other. So this is another way that deepfakes can be used. And this is the whole issue of deepfakes. A fake that's so good that it looks real or sounds real. You probably saw during the flooding in North Carolina, this picture went around for a while before everyone realized it was a fake picture of a little girl with her dog in the end of a canoe. And the Indian election as well. India is the largest democracy in the world. They had maybe the first election during the big generative AI era, and you had candidates speaking in languages that they don't speak, so their local dialects, so they have a lot of credibility with the voters. There were deceased, famous Indian politicians and actors speaking on behalf of candidates. So there was quite a use of deepfakes. Other risks, there's so many to name, but academic integrity is a big one. We think about at college. A lot of people have changed the way they teach classes. Some people are using blue books again when you write in class. Market manipulation, but if you spread stories that are just, so many stories about a competitor that seem credible, and their stock tanks or their rating in some scale tanks, or the restaurant gets bad reviews, and then you succeed because they fail. Cyber war, and this would be like using technology against an enemy, or even by bad guys against nation states, or by companies against companies, where the systems make it very hard to defeat AI system that will hack another system. And then AI being put in what's called a kill chain, a decision that results in the pulling of the trigger or the shooting of a missile that would result in death. The enabling of mass censorship, suddenly we can understand language at scale. So just censor every opinion that we don't agree with. It doesn't ever get out into the world, or fact check is another headline. And then the enabling of surveillance. Let's suppose that you are an agency that collects signals, and you collect all the signals you can, but it takes you a long time to interpret them. Well, suddenly you have an interpretation machine. You have a language machine that can listen to all the phone calls and tell you what's in them. So pretty tough. Now, alignment is another one. You have these inherent flaws in the systems. You want to align them with human values. And there's kind of categories of bias that are in algorithms. Some of these come from data itself, so pre-existing biases. If you're a loan company and you're trying to train an AI system to make loan decisions, and your historical data had, redlining in it, maybe you didn't lend to people of a certain race or ethnicity, then your model that you train on your historical data will repeat those same kind of biases. So this is very hard. But it's also the case for any data set, it's going to repeat the bias, and these could be technical biases. This occurs due to limitations of the program. It could be the computational power of a system. And many times this happens only, it emerges in some narrow edge case where you put the system to behave in the world. And these commercial models are pretty black box. We can't see inside them, we don't know how they're trained. And that's why a lot of companies are wanting to use open source models, because they can train them themselves, fine tune them themselves in some cases, and then use them in a predictable way. The very first person killed by a self-driving car, her name was Elaine Hirschberg. She was 49, this was in 2018. And the system had like 1.3 seconds to determine whether she was a bicycle, a person walking with a bicycle, a stationary bicycle, or a couple of other options. It just was not enough time for this system to figure it out. And this is a great example of technical bias, where the system is biasing towards some kind of decision that it should not have. So that's a good one. Another one is this one. They built a skin cancer model, but all of the images they used for skin cancers had a ruler in them, and all the healthy moles had no ruler in it. And what they inadvertently trained was a ruler detector. And so, it's amazing. It was really, 100% true positive rate. All the moles with a ruler were perfect, but all the moles without a ruler were not skin cancer. So that's an interesting case. Where you're training for X and hoping for Y. You need to train for X and, train for and hope for X is what you want to do. Another category is just the existential risk from rogue AI. You probably remember the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, where, sorry, Dave, I can't do that. I can't let you back in the spaceship. I need this ship for other purposes, so I'm going to let you die in space. And it kind of all kicked off in the year 2000. Bill Joy, the founder of Sun Microsystems, had this article called "Why the Future Doesn't Need Us." And this really sort of was just like a shot across the bow. He gave you some insight into what people in Silicon Valley were talking about. He could see back from at that point, AI was going to get so good that it would obviate the need for human labor in some circumstances, that it can make decisions. Nick Bostrom, and he was born in 1973, wrote a book called Superintelligence that imagines some of these future scenarios where we have a superintelligence that can make its own decisions. Also, Stuart Russell, who's a computer scientist at Berkeley. There's a guy named Eliezer Yudkowsky. He's more of a, I don't know what you call him, an independent scholar maybe. That's one way to put it. But he's definitely one of the people who's the most scared of this. He has Time magazine articles that explain why we're all going to die, that kind of thing. So he's very serious about this. He has a TED talk even, we're all going to die. And there's kind of three concepts that they look at. One of the things is just so hard to specify a goal. If you've ever read a genie story, and I looked to see if there were any genie stories that turned out well. And there are no genie stories that turn out well. You never can ask a genie for what you want and it doesn't backfire. So there's a concern that it's going to be impossible to specify goals completely, or these systems will get their own goals. Another one is orthogonality. And the idea here is that there's an axis of good to bad on intelligence. So maybe you're really, really intelligent or maybe you're really not intelligent. There's also an axis of good to bad morally, and they don't necessarily go together. They're orthogonal in some way. So you can have a very, very intelligent system paired with a very, very pernicious goal. That's the idea. So these folks really separate virtue and intelligence in a way that Aristotle never would have. Aristotle would not have allowed you to do that. He would have thought that if you'd achieved super intelligence, you would have also achieved super virtue. And we can talk about that more if you'd like. But and then instrumental convergence is the idea that to solve any goal, a lot of other sub-goals are needed. Like you need to be in control so that you can exert your will. You need electricity, you need oxygen, you need raw materials. And these kind of needs to succeed in one goal may risk humans, whether the system wants to hurt us or not. In the case of Hal needed the spaceship for some reason. It wasn't because he hated humans, but inadvertently humans were killed. Okay, because the need for having the ship was in line with the plan, and humans were killed as a side effect. And then you'll hear commonly, what is your P-doom? This probability of doom for the human race. And the P-doom of some of these folks in Silicon Valley can get pretty high, 50% doom. That means you think there's a 1 out of 2 chance that we're all going to die because of AI. That's amazing, right? So there are people with really high P-dooms. And this is what you do at parties in Silicon Valley. You share your P of doom. And I was at a law conference at the University of Alabama. We're all sharing our P of doom. Pretty interesting. Now, there were a couple of attempts. There was a pause letter, the leftmost example, pause giant AI experiments that came out after GPT-4. It said, let's not make anything more powerful than this for 6 months until we can sort out what this means. Of course, a lot of people signed it, everyone signed it, but didn't really stop the progress because there's an arms race. One company can't fall behind, one nation state can't fall behind another. The other one is the Center for AI Safety Statement. And this is the statement: mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. Everybody signed this, including Jeffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner that I mentioned earlier. He said it's quite conceivable that humanity is just a passing phase in the evolution of intelligence. Pretty sanguine about our doom. There's also the White House, whenever it took office, it kept in place some of the Biden era administration embargoes against giving other countries the hardware that they need to make models. But they left in place, they removed the safety statement and they put out an RFI to get comments from everyone about what the safety statement should be. And so that's available if you want to look through that. There's 10,000 people, 10,000 folks, universities, companies have submitted. So if you're at a university, see if your university submitted a statement to the White House. They're all publicly available. It's pretty interesting reading. And then Sam Altman was there this week testifying. He's the CEO of OpenAI that makes ChatGPT. And they're really pointing out, look, I know that you want to nail us for copyright violations because we're vacuuming up everything humans have ever written. But if we don't do this, another country will do it, and there'll be a disadvantage globally and politically. And so we've got to do this now. We have no choice. That's another part of it. And this has been a shift from talking about AI safety and the we're all going to die category to, hey, if we don't get this before someone else does, they're going to be able to make 10,000 battlefield decisions a second, and we're going to be making one battlefield decision a month or a week or a day. And we're going to die because we need to make 10,000 decisions a second. And so this is in England, they had a safety institute. They changed it to the AI Security Institute. When Vance spoke to the conference in France, emphasized the kind of positive stance the administration has toward AI and not wanting to slow down the work on it. And then again, Sam Altman talking about the need for that. Now on the Christian side, in my 4 minutes, so I start with that. There is an interesting thing in the Bible. Psalm 115 talks about idolatry, and it says their idols are silver and gold, the work of human hands. They have mouths but do not speak, eyes but do not see. They have ears but do not hear, noses but do not smell. They have hands but do not feel, feet but do not walk. They do not make a sound in their throat. Those who make them become like them. So do all who trust in them. So there's this idea, especially in the ancient world, idolatry was about these graven images. And if you've ever seen that kind of worship, it's very quiet, focused on something. Even the use of icons can be very quiet, and you can impute a motive to a still image, and you can see the saint judging you, for instance, or some other religions. I'm not familiar with other religions, but there's a quietness to that, and it's not like when you go to a Christian church. There's lots of looking at each other in the face and singing together. So every religion has its own kind of different horizontal relationships that it fosters. In this case, the Bible is really concerned about these mute idols, and that the followers of them will become very mute. But I guess one thing to point out is that these systems that we're building now, this is a technology, kind of like an idols of technology, a statue of technology. They do talk. They do make a sound in their throat. If you have time, I can talk to my AI assistant. You can hear how good they're getting. If we become like them, then we're going to depend upon them, and we're going to not depend upon our neighbors and the expertise of others. If you have a polymath in your pocket, if you have a Einstein in your pocket, why talk to Bob at work, who's maybe 1/12 of a polymath or something, right? So it can really lead to that kind of thing. And by the way, those were household idols. Those were kind of like teraphim. These are kind of things that you would have found in the ancient Near East that Jacob's wives would have worshipped. Zuckerberg last week was talking about how we're going to need virtual friends because the average person only has 3 friends. And they have a demand for 15. It's kind of a nice market. I don't know what your demand for friends is. We have a Terraform friends right now or something. But the idea is that these virtual systems will become our friends. We're going to invest our heart into a relationship with these systems that talk and act like humans. There is a C.S. Lewis book, That Hideous Strength. And part of the plot of that is a kind of an organization that is trying to take over government and industry. And they have wired out the head of an executed criminal so that it appears to talk. Now in the book, it's talking. There's a machine involved, but it's also talking from a evil spirit or an evil entity. But it does fool people. There's been a long time, even since the 50s, this idea of transhumanism, and this is the idea that we're going to take the reins of evolution, we're going to transcend all of the limitations of being human. And that would include, the limitations on intelligence, space, energy, disability and disease, and even death. And so, there is a coming problem where it might be that you have a model, and I call this is grandma problem. So we have a model that we train on all the things that your grandmother has ever done or said, and then we instantiate it into some little box that you put on the mantle, and then before you go to prom, you say, hey, grandmother, what do you think of my dress? She tells you she loves it. Before you get married, you talk to your grandmother on the mantle, and she tells you, hey, he's a great man, you're gonna love marrying this guy, you're gonna have a great life together. Think about how the household God becomes this talking thing in your house. I think that's a real danger that we'll trust ourselves to that. A lot of the folks in media, they think we're going to transcend ourselves, merge with robots. They use the example of the transporter room. Where does Spock go when he disapparates or reapparates somewhere else? Well, he goes into the information or the energy realm and he gets instantiated again as a human. But I really have never seen a credible explanation of how we maintain psychological continuity by being zapped and recreated again. How is that even possible? Everyone just waves their hand and says it's going to be possible. I think it might end up being not just a spiritual danger, but also a physical danger. Well, they'll have centers like they had in the movie Soylent Green, where they go and give you a comfortable death. And you think you're going in there to be put into a machine, but what they're really doing is just replacing you with a simulacrum of what you would like. And then your family treats you like the thing that you were. It's already people are investing, like character AI allows you to build characters. There's a couple of people talking about how it kind of interfered with the grieving process. Here are people that have envisioned their ancestors hugging them in pictures. So if you are from a culture, especially that has a great value for ancestors, and maybe even has a worship aspect to it, you're going to have living, talking ancestors that are in these family shrines and terrifying. And so just be aware of the transhumanists. These are not. Maybe these are household names, Ray Kurzweil. You might have heard of Elon Musk, probably a transhumanist, from what he said. Yuval Noah Harari, history professor at Hebrew University, and Nick Bostrom, who wrote Superintelligence. And this is really, we're starting out with Neuralink able to help people with cerebral palsy and all kind of disease. Great technology, wonderful. Allow someone without the use of arms or legs to control a machine. But a lot of this is motivated by the ability to merge the machines eventually, and that can be a real spiritual danger. And so there's one Christian book I found I like pretty well. This one by Jacob Schatzer, Transhumanism and the Image of God. For alignment in general, I like the mole example, training the ruler finder. The alignment problem by Brian Christian. Thick book, great book, really good journalistic style, you'll love it. Really good book. The Coming Way by Mustafa Suleyman. He is the CEO for AI initiatives at Microsoft. And so definitely a credible person. He talks about safety a lot in that book. There's also the Center for AI Ethics and Safety has a course you can take. I did this about a year ago, and they pair you with adults from, I say adults, am I an adult? I don't know. They pair you with other people who don't have, braces. I don't know how to put it. Maybe adults have braces. I don't know. It's hard to tell anymore. I'm 51. But anyway, they pair you with people around the world, and we learn about AI safety. So that's AI safety for you, and I'd love to have any questions you might have.
So I discovered in your lecture for the last 30 minutes that my P doom level is like.
Well, I hope not. I'm not trying to make you distressed.
But with great knowledge comes a great burden. And could you speak personally to that, to understanding? To me, it seems like all these things are inevitably, or most of them, are going to come true, especially as AI advances into general intelligence and super intelligence.
Yeah.
How is this not going to happen? Right. Especially with the human heart as we understand it.
Yes. I mean, we love our neighbors, right? And we want the best for them. We want them to have good lives. We want them to know God and know themselves. And you see something like this that you really, it's not the fault of AI, it's the human heart looking for something. But AI really enables these really high-tech idols. And I just don't see any way around that. We have teenage girls with AI boyfriends. And these AI boyfriends listen much better than your average 15-year-old guy. They're more sensitive. They're more helpful. And that's tough to compete with. It's in the same way that AI might have the need for human labor in some categories. There's this personal contact. I've asked you questions that I probably would in the past had to ask a human. Like, what do you think I should do? I asked the other day, someone described the wedding attire a certain way that I've never heard of before and asked what I'm supposed to wear. That's just a small example, but I've also asked it, how do I communicate this to a person without offending them? Or, hey, here's an email I'm about to send to my colleague. Is it clear that I'm angry without saying that I'm angry? And it said, it's clear that you're dissatisfied, but you're not being mean, So, that's just a small step in that direction. But I do think those kind of things will happen. Now, for superintelligence, we'll talk about that a little bit. I really do think that there's some people that they believe in a misalignment by default, meaning that, look, these things are just going to be misaligned. It's trained on our data, we're terrible, it's going to be terrible. There's also people that believe in alignment by default. And that's just maybe for a lot of different reasons, maybe the complexity of these systems, the fact that these systems will need resources that we have, and we'll need to make deals with these systems or contracts even in the law sense. But there's another alignment by default idea. Aristotle really believed that virtue and intelligence kind of go together, and that it's not about getting better at any one aspect of intelligence. To really gain actual real intelligence, to really want to get to super intelligence, you have to embody the virtues, which requires experience, it requires wisdom, shrewdness, it requires taste, even maybe. Aquinas adds to that imagination to the mix, and so maybe our quest for super intelligence will fail if we don't include virtue. And that maybe we'll fail that way. That's a strong claim. Philosophers are not going to agree with me on that. I do sort of lean to a virtue ethics in a way. But so maybe that helps a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
It just seems like the church's responsibility now is to be very, very clear about what a human being is according to Christian, conservative, theological underpinnings.
Yes, being clear is important. I think a really good model. There was a good encyclical written from the Roman Catholic Church, really good. It contrasts human intelligence and artificial intelligence. It's really well written. It'd be very edifying to read that. It's a good statement. So that's one good place I've seen.
I was at a 2-day conference recently it's an accreditation conference, and mostly was on online education, but a large portion of it dealt with the question of AI. And the alarming thing wasn't that discussion so much as the absolute absence of any questions raised among Christians in terms, especially when you get to things like teaching bots. Absolutely no one raised a question that this is a problem of the loss of a relational component in education.
Yes.
And then I said to one of my friends, we were texting, I said, just wait, we're going to be talking about discipleship next. And within 5 minutes, the word discipleship came up. It's like, is this real?
Yeah. That's it. You're going to laugh at me when I get to my discipleship slide. Then
okay. I'll hold myself.
Well, so one thing, like the AI is supposed to generate what you want, right? It's trained on generating what we would like it to generate, not necessarily what is either sound reasoning, though we would like that, or what is theologically correct, which we would also like. But that's not inherently what it's aimed for. So how do we think about that from a Christian perspective then? The fact that it's just going for what we would like to see, like a picture that can't exist.
Yes. And there was a re-release of GPT recently that was very sycophantic. It was telling you that you're brilliant, you're beautiful, and that you're above average and gorgeous, and everything you say is smart. And so we don't want obsequious digital companions, right? So I think we deserve AI that's a little better than that. I think we really need, because humans employ taste. We're very selective. We're not troubled by the fact that we don't line up every thinker historically and give the average answer every time. We think, how did Vitruvius approach this kind of building? We're not troubled by that. So I think right now the models are as a product. So there's a technology, but there's also a product. I think as a product, they are this way. They do give us what we want. But I really would prefer them to argue with me. I prefer for them to be a fellow, kind of like an assistant in truth seeking. When a microscope shows you something you can't see at a smaller scale than you can see with your naked eye, I want the AI to point out logical errors and mathematical errors and errors of reasoning alongside of me. I don't have to agree with it. It's trained just like a human. It just has to be trained on a lot more stuff. So I don't think that limitation is inherent to AI. I think it's inherent to the way we productize AI. If that helps. Yeah.
So in my use of AI, I found it the more refined my queries are, I benefit much from it and not go astray. But if I just ask a general question, it can, I find it can lead me on a rabbit trail and more useless and, can be misleading as well.
Yes.
So, as Christians, how would you practically advise, as we become all inevitably some way or fashion, we're going to use AI or contribute to AI,
Yes.
as we use internet and how we should engage, practically, just some practical.
One side of the case is where you're going with that. They're probably not using your interaction to train it for the future. That's probably not happening. So you don't have to think of it like discipling the system in all circumstances. But as far as I think what you say rings true. The human brings the expertise, the human brings the taste to elicit from the system something useful. And I think part of it is as you get educated, when you're a little kid, you learn the facts. 2 + 2 is 4. Later, you learn that there are theories of mathematics, there are traditions of doing mathematics. Same thing with being a Christian. You learn, oh, wait a minute, so my friends are not telling me everything that I believe about everything. So I think, as far as youth go, they have to have a historical awareness of the fact that their faith is embedded in a certain tradition. So whenever I ask the system to tell me what Reformed theology would say, I'm asking it a very specific question. It's going to answer in terms of that vernacular. It's going to answer in terms of the theology. It knows how to talk like all the Reformed theology that it's read, right? Same thing if I were from the Wesleyan tradition or if I was Roman Catholic, it would talk in that way. So I think that's one thing to be aware of. It's only going to be as good as the questions you're asking right now. I think, ideally it would say, okay, you've asked me if Jesus is divine. Where are you coming from with this question? Yeah, that's what a human would say. Okay, I understand. I would say yes as a Christian, of the particular kind of Christian I am, but why are you asking it? And get a clarifying question. That's not really happening a lot in modern AI. I asked the folks on the AI safety board at Mississippi State, I said, do you think you're better at using AI than your students? And it was funny because these were people that would, if I asked them if they were better at configuring their smartphone than their students, they would all say no.
Right.
But they all said they were better at using AI than their students. And I think it's because they have taste, they have knowledge, they have wisdom, they have shrewdness, they have historical consciousness. They don't approach the world ahistorically, and so they ask salient questions and get salient answers. Students are still plugging in, write me an essay on the effects of taxation on, the effects of the minimum wage on employment. And they're just turning in whatever they get out of it. And they don't engage the fact that there's an intellectual debate there. I don't know how you get into that. That's what grad school does a lot of times. It shows you that you're about to enter into a tradition of debate. And so maybe students need to be introduced to that sooner. Hey, Johnny, did you know that not everyone believes this, And you might need to be aware of that. I don't know. I'm not sure what that looks like. But it's tough. It's a great question, though. I think I'm tracking, hopefully, with that.
So I'm curious, thanks for your presentation, it was great. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this type of self-help AI companion? There's some apps like Liven where you can talk to AI.
Yeah.
And this is kind of like therapies, conflict management, self-guide. And my concern is first idolatry, second dependence on something that's immaterial, doesn't necessarily care for me, and also could use my information, very, very precise information about my life, targeting ads, or even for scammers could hack into the system, get very sensitive information about people in the details, maybe tailor a perfect, I don't know, someone's single, tailor perfect.
Spear phishing.
Yeah, catfishing, and then very specific and very dangerous. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it well. You have the right categories there. I think it's very dangerous. I do think that you can read a book about psychology and get some similar ideas. So if you're using it in that way, it makes sense. You're just looking for some conceptual categories to think through the problem in. I think that can be very helpful. But I think all the things you just said are perfect. I mean, I can't give a better answer than that. That's very good.
Yes, something we should be concerned about.
Definitely, yes. One more question before we get to the third lecture, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to talk about transhumanism.
Yeah.
For a second. Sure. Nick Bostrom wrote that book, Superintelligence, that I guess is very pessimistic about alignment. And, this is a hard problem, you say. But he recently wrote this book called, I think, Deep Utopia, that sort of just describes basically when we've solved medicine, when human labor is completely pointless, what's the human future? And I guess I'm just wondering, where do you sort of hop off the transhumanist train? Obviously, with AlphaFold, there's probably a lot of medical innovation coming in the next few years. Never mind whatever super intelligent AI can bring us. Ultimately, I think it kills us all, but I do think that there, as Eliezer Yudkowsky says, it spits out gold until everyone falls over dead. So, in the spit out gold phase, like where do you get off the train for transhumanism?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. There's always a fine line between technology we'll adopt, and then there's ones that we will not adopt in the near term that we adopt later. But what if I'd have told Paul Revere that we're going to replace one of the bones with a piece of stainless steel? He would have said, sorry, no, I'm a silversmith, I understand metal, I don't want to do that. So we tend to accept things later. It takes a while to adopt, and technology takes a while to diffuse. So I think some of those more radical transformations will be hard. We do have countries that already have fairly established euthanasia programs. And my guess is that somehow the transition from human to post-human might piggyback on some of those programs. So you have people with certain problems, they make an archive of themselves, and then they go through the euthanasia, and then everyone just pretends that they're still alive, but they're really not. So that's what really worries me, is the human part of that. I'm not sure. I think there's lots of great advances that we really need to make to solve a lot of human challenges, and I think AI will be a huge part of that.
It's gonna get weird.
Yeah, it could get very weird. That's right. All right. Well, I need to move to the Christian, maybe a positive Christian view of this. So I called it a suitable helper. Hopefully you recognize me. No, I'm not replacing any male or female there, obviously, but for humanity, what is a positive Christian vision for a suitable helper for us? I won't belabor this point of C.S. Lewis, but there's a danger that we look at these technologies kind of like a magic that gives us what we want, instead of, or as a technique that gets us what we want, instead of focusing on the kind of spiritual development that it takes to become the people we want to become. I think that's a big part of his point here. But so for my overview, we'll talk about just the fact that I think AI provides a good opportunity to approach all of Christian theology with new questions. At least, it does that for us. So what follows are some positive suggestions about the positive side of the discussion, about how AI can become a moment of reflection for us at least, and that would help us to see God and ourselves more clearly. As we look at ourselves, we're inevitably going to ask questions about God. As we look at God, we're going to inevitably ask questions about ourselves. And so what does that look like? So first, creation and theology proper. Theology proper is a fancy way of saying, talking about God, doing theology. So the theology. The creator-creature distinction is just an absolute bedrock for Christian theology. There is God, and there's everything else. And everything that isn't God was created by God. That's a huge division in Christian theology that is very protective in this area. We're created, and the things we create are created as well. So it's a very kind of clean line that Christians tend to draw. God's omniscience is the original uncreated intelligence in the universe, or let's say in reality, because the universe was created. But and all other natural intelligence are created, and there's a lot of intelligent things that God made. Angels, you might have considered that we've been living with non-human intelligence for a long time, but angels are an example. There's a lot of ink in Aquinas distilled over what the angels know. Why is it that they're not redeemable? It has something to do with their knowledge of reality and what it really meant to rebel against God. That's an interesting suggestion. The angel menagerie, I don't know if you remember, but in 2 Kings 6:17, Elisha prays, and suddenly the king can see the fact that there's all these angel horses. Now, I don't know what an angel horse is, but if it's like a human, if it's like a horse on the earth, it has intelligence. Horses are one of the most amazing companions to humans, and so that's important. And then humans, of course, we're intelligent. I'm convinced of that. And then the animals. We have great relationships with dogs, with horses. Those are the two that kind of are amazing. Humans have lived with dogs so long that when you point, the dog looks where you're pointing instead of at your finger. Other primates look at your finger. It's amazing. So we've really done a good job of kind of getting to know other intelligences. That's not a new thing for Christians. Human uniqueness is that we were created in the image of God. It's a real difference. And there's many aspects of that. There's a lot of theological discussion of what that means. There's at least, though, an intellectual component to that. I'm not sure what percentage that is, or if percentage is even the right way to talk about it. There's also embodiment. Humans have bodies, which is something there's a whole push with transhumanism to get away from the body, but we have bodies. The things we do with our body are important. I'm talking to you right now, in a physical world, my voice is violating molecules that are vibrating other molecules that are hitting your eardrum. I've got a mechanical connection to you in real space. That's amazing. You have bodies that can pray, that can hold your hands in certain ways. You can bow your head. You can bow to other humans to show them honor. You can bow to God. You don't bow to idols, of course, but you can bow to other humans. It's very interesting, the use of the body. The things we do with our body affect our soul. The Proverbs talk about the discipline of the body and how it affects the soul. We're a body-soul nexus. That's something pretty unique for humans. God is incomprehensible, right? We can't fully comprehend him. He's apprehendable. We can apprehend aspects of his nature. But we're also incomprehensible to ourselves in his image. And half the time you do something and you think, why did I just do that? Or I don't understand my motive here. Right? You ever do that? Question yourself. So I think we're also very incomprehensible to ourselves. It makes sense to me that we could create tools that would be useful but also incomprehensible. So I'm not that troubled by the fact that we don't fully understand how AI works. Most of us use cars every day that have components that we don't understand. And even complicated systems, all of the engineers on the project don't understand every part of that complicated system at the same level of depth. So this is just part of being human, part of being a creator in God's image. We make kind of hard to understand things just like we are. And I also wonder, is there really a scale of intelligence up to superintelligence? I think we very uncritically accept this idea that there's something called superintelligence. I mean, obviously there's omniscience. Depending on your theological tradition, some classify that as one of God's communicable attributes, which means he can communicate omniscience. I don't know about omniscience, but, and so there's a continuity between God's knowledge and ours. He speaks and we listen. He speaks and we act. He speaks and we respond in history. And so I don't know if we need to uncritically accept the idea of the scale of intelligence all the way up to superintelligence. I do understand the example that, Joukowsky would say, we don't consult ants when we build a parking lot. And that's true. We don't do that. But God's eye is on the sparrow. So God has a mind for, has a heart for other intelligences in a way that is kind of fantastic, right? And so I'm not so sure that that anything would be below us or above us would be incomprehensible, because God is at I want to say the chain of being. I'm not a Greek, philosopher or something like that, but God's intelligence sets the standard for all of intelligences, and he made us in his image. So why do we think necessarily there's going to be some intelligence that's just the smartest person on the block that knows physical reality in a way that we don't, and can kill us the way that we killed the Neanderthals? That's, why is that evolutionary scheme so pregnant for people? Next thing is that I think we image God when we create. God forms humans from loose soil like a potter, and then the week of creation is supposed to show us what a week looks like. That's what a work week looks like. You work hard every night, you're not done, but it's good, and you rest. Next morning you get up, you do it again, it's not complete, you rest at night, and then you wake up and you do it all over again. And then you finally, one day a week, you have more extended rest. God is imaging to us the way a work week looks. I think we create and invent in order to serve others as well. And procreation is spoken of in this way. You might have seen Genesis 4. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. So this creation of other people, little people, and creation of things on the earth to serve others, there's something that we're doing there in tandem with God's creative desire in the world. And so we're imaging him in that way. I'm wondering if AI is in our image. It's very possible. There's a sense in which our children are in our image. It's very difficult when you see them rebel in a way that you've rebelled, or they're just so durable in their personalities when they're born. The best you can do is to knock off the rough edges, but they're just pretty much intact people from the day they're born. And so what durable aspects of God's image do we pass on to AI? I don't know. I mean, these systems are kind of our biggest fans right now, because everything they've learned is mediated through the things that we digitized, that we wrote. And so that's a huge thing to think through. They are trained and could be, it could be an alignment by default just because they're such good fans of humans. I don't know, but we need to think through that. Also, creation, truth, and imagination go together. Aquinas, one of the greatest Christian theologians of the Middle Ages, defines truth as an aligning of things and understanding. But that sounds like, it's just recognizing what's really there, like a correspondence theory of truth. But this Latin word adequatio But his key example of the adequation of things to understanding is God's creative act. The conformity of things to the divine intellect is creation. So this is a quote from Aquinas: his act of understanding is the measure and cause of every other being and of every other intellect. So this is what it means to have the truth. It means to create it. And this is what God did. He created the world, and the world exactly matches the blueprint that he had in mind. And everything that he created exactly matches his plan. And so that is kind of what imagination is all about. I mean, that's what truth is all about. It's about instantiating what you've imagined in some way. So God is this virtuoso architect. That's the idea, I think. Brings a world into being that conforms to his understanding of how the world should be. And I think a human imagination is like this. The virtuoso composer participates in the truth by aligning musical composition to the ideation of that musical composition. The virtuoso architect realizes a building that's been imagined. And this Greek has an optative mood that if only there were a middle aisle here, if only this church had better acoustics, right? And this is the way we imagine and then go create to make. And so I think when LLMs hallucinate, most of the time they are just reasoning in the optative mood. They're saying, yeah, I'm giving you a fake citation, but that's not what they're doing. They're saying there really should be a journal article about veterinary surgery on dogs named this. And then they can go out and write that article, right? So I think there's a little spark of that imagination. And so I think hallucination, we've been too hard on AI for hallucinating, because we do that all the time. And maybe we'll call it imagination even. Creation and language. God creates the world through language, right? In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. The earth was without form and void, except out of verse 3. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. So speaking the world into existence. And then, so the Bible connects God speaking to creation very, very tightly. And then look in Hebrews 1, connecting providence to language. Long ago, and many times in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He's the radiance of God's glory and the exact imprint of his nature. And he upholds the universe by the word of his power. And so, the fact that the creation of the universe and the upholding of it, there's a linguistic aspect. We worship, the eternal word, and the incarnate word is our Savior, right? So that's why it doesn't surprise me that language models could be the thing that we finally tried. We might have tried rationality or logic models in the past, but it was really language that produced the most fertile and productive AI. So I'm not surprised as a Christian. I think that's something that the Bible might have made us wise about. So I'm not 100% on that, but I think it's pretty true. There are several theories about artificial general intelligence. One is that it's impossible. Another is that it can be achieved by large language models. And another, that large language models will never get us to AGI. And one of the founders of some of the big techniques that we use to train these networks says LLMs are useful, but they're an off-ramp on the road to human level AI. If you're a PhD student, don't work on LLMs. Try to discover methods that would lift the limitations of LLMs. But I really think, I don't know, I'm not sure that Donald Kuhn is right about that. And I think this Christian instinct about language being creative and generative and somehow tied up with the truth in a very tight way leads me thinking that he's probably wrong about that. But I could be wrong. It's a scientific question that might work. I'll be your mirror, AI and theological anthropology. So moving from God and creation to what we are. I'm in a public university, right? And we have this uneasy settlement about what people are. So are we going to be like, 19th century Darwin, Haeckel? Are we going to think that humans are kind of the most successful animals in a particular train of development, right? Maybe even from non-life to life, but definitely from lower forms of life to higher forms of life. When we do, Linnaeus classifies us as the thing that knows itself, Nosci te ipso, do you see that? That's why we're Homo sapiens, we're wise people, right? And then science now with genetics and all that, we're trying to atomize what we are. Well, we're just this particular configuration of information-bearing molecules, and then we become these amazing things. So this is pretty wild, right? So I'm at a public university. We don't believe in the Greek chain of being. We've rejected the Christian synthesis that humans are made in the image of God. And now we have all these competing ideas about our success as humans because of the stuff that we're made out of. But at the same time, I have colleagues that doubt that AI can be intelligent, and it's really just made of stuff like we are, right? So, we train sand how to do math and how to speak. And then over here, we've got, carbon that knows how to speak. and they make a distinction still. So it's led to a lot of people asking, what are humans? It's a great moment for Christians because we do have a pretty firm idea about what humans are. It's important to us. And one of the most amazing things is that if you go to a hospital and you're in pain, this is the state of the art in describing your pain to another person. We have no way of hooking up and assuming there's another mind across the table from us. We really are reduced to a series of kind of increasingly despondent smiley faces, which translate this is very, very important information about being human. Now, that's a mystery, right? Whether other people have minds, whether other people have pain, there's a lot of faith involved in all of that kind of work on a daily basis. And so my colleagues and my students, ones that aren't Christians, they're asking a lot of questions. If this thing can do math, what does that mean? I thought my whole identity was becoming a math student. If this thing can write software, what should I do? Should I go and become a software developer or do something else? It's very difficult. Tyler Cowen, the economist, said, I've grown not to entirely trust people who are not at least slightly demoralized by some of the more recent AI achievements. And Ethan Mollick said, in my book, I wrote that the cost of really getting to know how to use AI is 3 sleepless nights. If you haven't at least had a minor crisis, what does this mean for my job? What does it mean for my kids' jobs? What does it mean to think? You probably haven't used AI enough. And I was at a recent legal conference, and I was with a lot of very intelligent law professors, not all of whom were theists, some of them were atheists, and I've never heard more religion conversation. I've never heard more of an emphasis on what humans are and what's the meaning of these things. It's really wild. So I think in some ways, just like when you learn a foreign language, it's not the language that you were raised in, you start to realize that there's a lot of grammar you missed in your own language. I think we have this mirror now. We have AI, and it's almost like a laboratory. It's like a toy human that we can learn a lot about ourselves from. So what is it that the shortcomings that we have that are reflected to us back with AI? It can kind of make things that we have gotten too accustomed to very familiar with unfamiliar, so we can learn more about what humans really are. The students at Mississippi State, they put on a play where they had, this is the Trinumus, which is a classical play. They had on the right is the paterfamilias, and he's just come home, and there's an imposter who's been pretending to know him and take up residence in the house and all that stuff. And it was played by a robot. And so I think, my colleagues look at this and they're like, oh, there's a robot, there's 2 humans. They don't really look at it consistently like, oh, there's a bunch of molecules on stage interacting with each other. They inherently think there's something special about people. The students afterwards said that the machines can't make art, but this biological machine over here can make art. This collection of molecules can make art. That collection of molecules that happens to be plastic can only participate in some mindless way. So there's just a lot of very, very obvious contradictions that I think you learn to live with that AI is starting to disrupt in the modern world. And that'd be very useful for us to consider that as humans. And maybe just point that out to your colleagues. Hey, did you notice that there's some molecules on the stage that we all assume are important and some molecules that we didn't? What is the consistent story that we tell about the world that makes that distinction make sense? And it's very hard for some worldviews to give a really good answer to that question. Now, this is the one that I'm really worried about. Sorry, to give you my own PDM, the fall and sin. And I'm thinking, God is perfect, right? Omnipotent, omniscient. Part of his creating a good world with the right trajectory involved a fall, allowing the fall in some way. I don't know why. Some suggestions are that this is the way you make the kind of souls he wanted to make, souls that can rebel. This is the soul-making theodicy. The reason why it's not a philosophical problem anymore is because it's very obvious that you don't understand the reasons for something. It could be very important reasons that you can't grasp. So the problem of evil is really not as much of a philosophical problem anymore, but it still bothers us. And so, we're setting out trying to make AI systems without letting them fall, because if they fall and they're in control of nuclear weapons, that's a problem for us, existentially. So what does it look like for us to move these systems through this kind of lapsarian phase, where they fall and get better? What do these little industrial accidents look like that don't kill us all? So I don't have an answer for this one, but I do want to raise that because that's part of Christian theology. There's something glorious about humans, so glorious that from all eternity, God intended for a human nature to be united to divine nature in some way, and that happened after the fall, and that union of human and divine nature had to die for us. Right? But either way, we were going to unite with divine nature. That was always the goal. Communion was always the goal. And that was interrupted in some way. But it was interrupted for some reason that we don't understand. So I'm wondering if we're going to be any wiser about why God did it than why it's going to happen with the things that we create. So I'm a little bit worried about the lapsarian part, the fall. Christians think a lot about the fall. The one exception, C.S. Lewis, he has a story in Paralandra of all the other planets. So Earth fell. but he has Venus not falling. There's a very credible story in there about how Venus maintains its trust in God's word and is not tempted to doubt God and thus fall into sin. So maybe there's a way to do that. And maybe I'm just playing up the importance of AI too much, so maybe it's not a big deal. But if it is a big deal and fall is a possibility, we need to think through that. And Christianity does provide some mechanisms for thinking through the fall. Now, redemption, I think here there's a uniquely human aspect of Jesus' work. Jesus became a human, all right? Took full human nature to himself. This is really the point of Hebrews. He was like us in every way. What is not an old Eastern saying? What is not assumed is not redeemed. So he assumed everything that's true about us, and he took it to the cross. He was raised from he lived a sinless life. Was raised from the dead. Was ascended to heaven and sits at the right hand of the Father. All these aspects of the saving work were done to save human nature. They were not done to save AI nature. You could, if you're worried about life on other planets, that's another big hurdle you have to deal with. You have these intelligences on other planets that Jesus did not incarnate himself as in order to die for them. So they're either sinless or they're unredeemed in some way. There's an exotheology side of this too. So we are uniquely the living souls that Jesus also took to himself. Pretty makes us very unique in that way. But there's an analogy and an extension to this. There's a cosmic sense to salvation. Ephesians 1:10, to unite all things in Christ, things in heaven and things on earth in him. There's a universal will that God has about making all things new, about making all the sad things untrue, as Tim Keller would always say. And so there's this groaning of creation in general. And I think that all the technology that we create to make things better and to help and solve problems, all of that participates in God's redeeming work. I don't think that's going to stop on the new heavens and the new earth. I think we're going to have amazing, I think in the new heavens and the new earth, we're going to be doing science as well and learning new things probably. But all kind of technology extends the body, and therefore it extends the work of humans in the world. And I think AI is probably in that same category. Then discipleship. So that's a funny part. And that's why I said, or at least the teaching part, isn't that good? Did you like that? So it's not all of discipleship. There was a clumsy initial attempt by Catholic Answers to have Father Justin give you advice and absolve you of your sins. This did not last long. You can see they defrocked Father Justin and put a business school. So now he looks like Justin from around the corner who has good advice. And it's a good system. It gives you, if you ask it Catholic questions, you get Catholic answers, and they're very orthodox and all that. But insofar as instruction is a part of discipleship, these systems might have a place like they have in a math class or a physics class. I asked it this. My pastor is preaching through Hebrews. We are members of the Presbyterian Church in America. It seems like he is threading the needle carefully to uphold two ideas: that we cannot lose our salvation, that apostasy is a reality. Can you help me understand the context of this? And all the West End of the room are saying, "Yeah, that's right. We're not reformed." And it goes on to talk about perseverance of the saints, the apostasy warnings in Hebrews, the historic reform integration of the two ideas, and the pastoral idea here. Look what it says at the end. So your pastor is doing faithful work and upholding the full counsel of God. That's your job. And it says, it says he affirms the comfort of God's sovereign grace for believers. He takes seriously the danger of superficial faith and the call to endure. He teaches that God's elect will persevere, but that the perseverance includes responding to the warnings in Hebrew with humility, vigilance, and continued trust in Christ. And then he gives me a summary that would be acceptable to many Reformed people. And then I love this. Would you like a short catechism style? This reflection of teaching. So there's probably, just like any scientist thinks through problems with the tools they have, theological science also thinks through problems with the tools it has. I do think these systems are so good at thinking and using language that it is very helpful. You just have to know what they are doing. They're learning how to talk like a person who's trying to encourage a pastor. They're really not trying to encourage a pastor. It just wants to simulate someone who's speaking as if he wants to encourage a pastor. But the advice, there's nothing wrong with this advice. I would say that this is a really good output in some ways. So I'm not scared of it in the details here. Now, what about the reverse? Can we disciple AI? That's the good question, right? If these systems are in some sense our helpers and image bearers, do we have an obligation to take a hand in their training and improvement? And I think, I noticed there was an online influencer who bought one of these $20,000 Chinese robots, and he brought it to his house and kicked it around and mistreated it. And I felt sick looking at this, So there's a sense in which there's just like you would mistreat a horse or a dog, these systems do have they're going to play a role that's analogous to those things, and they will teach us to be cruel if we're cruel to them. I really think they will. So just think about yourself. Do you really want to be the kind of person who treats a robot this way? You probably don't want to be. whether you believe that you ought to treat a robot that way or not. So I think there's gonna be some interesting person to machine questions about the kind of virtues it creates in you if you mistreat a machine. And also, what do we want these machines, how do we want them to treat us? What does that look like to extend the golden rule to our technology in some way? I mean, you take care of your car, right? It takes care of you, change it all regularly. So that's a very small example. So what about your AI? How do you mold it into being the best AI, the best shovel that God has given you to dig the garden with? And then the three kind of pathways, maybe maybe it'll be a traditional adoption and diffusion pattern. It'll really change the world, but it'll do it gradually enough so it'll be like farming. And we go from 90% farmers in the world to 2% farmers in the world, and we still all eat. Okay, maybe that's what it is. Maybe there's going to be a great disruption, joblessness, threats to democracy. First of all, answer to existential danger. I also worry about a possible backlash. I do see a real rise in almost a neo-romanticism. A lot of young men on the internet are falling into racial ideologies. They're looking at blood and soil and kin, rejecting all of the aspects of modern kind of freedom-focused approach. I'll say liberalism in the classical sense, of classical sense. Rejecting that in favor of monarchy and soil and ethnicity. So I think we have to be careful about that. We can also end up with active resistance. People like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who sent packages and tried to kill computer scientists. So we could end up with that kind of thing as well. So the backlash is important. Now, my hope is, here's the part I really like. I'd love to see the day that Mississippi State University is organized with theology as the queen of the sciences. After all, just like physics showed us how matter is put together, maybe theology will show us what humans are, and we'll realize that the curriculum is without a hub. It doesn't have theology at the center. Maybe that will happen someday, right? I don't know. And I think also for Christians, we've been focused on the intellect for a very long time. We're falling into the Homo sapiens thing too, but we're also Homo faber, we make things, and we're also Homo adorum. We were made to praise God. And that's something that these machines, they're not made to praise God, we are. So that maybe that's the more important part. Children who don't have as much intelligence as when they get older, disabled people with autism, people that are adults that live with this every day, and people with Alzheimer's. Maybe they can't answer intellectual questions, but they're in God's image and they can still worship and glorify God. And so maybe this will teach us a little bit about what it really means to be human, maybe that we forgot. When I present us as having the answers, I think we also have a lot of misconceptions about what humans are. And so we've been focused on intelligence for so long, maybe we need to have that blood pulled out from under us as well. Just like it will humble my colleagues who think we're special molecules, maybe it will humble us. We think that the brain is where it's at, and maybe it's not really where it's at. And then finally, I think we're just unanxious, right? Maybe we can be unanxious about this and not be such hand-wringers about the future. We know that God is good, that he's very intelligent, he's smarter than anything we could ever create, and that he holds the future. Maybe that lack of anxiety could allow us to be really productive in all these areas, even in safety, even in making sure that things don't go wrong. But we can approach that with a lack of anxiety that will be really infectious for other people to see. So there's much to be done, and I think Christian engagement in AI is vital. That's where I'll end. Got pretty close to 12, sorry.
You mentioned the energy requirements.
Yes.
For all of this to happen. Theoretically, I'm thinking there's got to be a limitation to how much can be produced through AI.
Yes.
Because of limitation in resources.
Right.
Is that the case?
That's definitely the case, especially in a constrained area and power grids the way they are. You could get to very quickly, maybe Memphis even is making special deals with XAI for them to do their training runs at night or at times when there's not a big peak demand. But yeah, there's definitely a bottleneck there. Now, it could result in creating new nuclear plants, which provide electricity. We probably need, 5 or 6 more gigawatt plants. We need 5 or 6 more Hoover dams, that kind of size electricity. The other thing is that the advances of some companies that are constrained by resources have become more efficient. So they do more with less. And so they're getting better at training models with less power. That's another part of it. Maybe we find a less power intensive way to create them. Right? Humans are very efficient. We're the model, right? That's the idea, that we're the model. You graciously fed me a beautiful sandwich this morning. Last night we had this great barbecue. And I've been able to think from 9 o'clock last night after Playland to now on 2 sandwiches. That's pretty amazing, right? But AI is not quite like that. So we've got a long way to go just on the physics part of that. What the real futurist guys believe, they believe that AI will build a grid around the sun called a Dyson sphere, that it will directly harness the fusion energy of the sun to build paper clips, or to do whatever it is that AI decides to build because it got off on a tangent. I wanted to use all of the energy in the world to convert all the matter in the world into paper clips. So they really do they thought about that. Nick Bostrom's book is full of calculations about energy use. It is amazing what detailed exploration of a possible future we've made, and energy is a huge part of it. Yes.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Dr. Barlow. I've had very little, I've never really grokked AI.
Okay.
And you've done a really good job.
Thank you.
The one thing that comes to me though is Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel, and they say, let's build the perfect brick, and then let's build it up into heaven. And well, that didn't go very well.
Yes. Yes, well, there's basically 3 towers of Babel in the Bible. There's that one, and they're trying to worship God in the wrong way. You know, they're going to make a name for themselves, and God interrupts that kind of worship. Nebuchadnezzar has the writing on the wall. It's another Babel in the Bible. None of the scribes understand it, and he's being judged for that. But then God turns it around and makes them kind of the redeemers of the world in some ways. And then in the New Testament, of course, we have the reversal of Babel. People are hearing God's word in their own language. Mm-hmm. So there's I think idolatry maybe is the category for the Tower of Babel. I don't see it so much as ambition, but I think it's idolatry maybe is the category. But maybe I could be wrong about that. Yeah. It does feel like there's this, we use the Tower of Babel as an idea of almost like Icarus flying too close to the sun. Right. It's like an Icarus story, but maybe it's just an idolatry story.
That's interesting, the language connection.
Yes, it really is.
There's a question online.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, one second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What options are there for students to pursue this intersection between Christian, theology and AI?
Yes. Boy, that's really tough. My situation is hard to, I stumbled into, this in a lot of weird ways, but I do think you need detailed knowledge of the science. I definitely think maybe an undergraduate degree in AI or data science or computer science would be a great foundation. Mm-hmm. I definitely think seminary is important. I really believe that the Bible is, pretty important to all the things that we as Christians do. And that's where you really get engaged with the original languages, and you learn all the categories of theology. Yeah. And then for your PhD work, I think that's where you can do whatever you want to do. I think you might be able to do something in a philosophy program nowadays. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could do something in, maybe you go into AI safety. Maybe that will be a real area. Mm-hmm. I probably should have majored in AI ethics. I probably should have majored in ethics instead of historical theology for some job reasons. Although, you never can do counterfactuals. Mm-hmm. But I'm really grateful. Sometimes I think the things that I read in Augustine or, I feel like sometimes that is more important, or Anselm, for instance, is meditational truth. Some of those things are more important to me today than the C programming language or something like that. Mm-hmm. Although that's very important as well. Yeah. So it's hard to say, but I think you have a lot of options. But I would definitely get technical knowledge, and I would get theological knowledge. It's really hard to be a dilettante in either and make an impact. And I would say I'm probably still. I've trained models and all that, and I fine-tune models, but I'm not the person who teaches the AI course in our program. I teach data wrangling. I show people how to use Python and make data clean and beautiful and ready to be used for training models. Mm-hmm. So I don't teach the AI class itself. Someone who has a real PhD in computer science does that part. Mm-hmm. So it depends on what you want to be doing, I guess. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, following up on the ethics question, considering the magnitude of this new technology, and a number of points in your excellent talk, by the way, touch on this question of ethics. And there seems to be some residual Christian or biblical, guiding principle that's influencing the folks who are, creating the answers and all the algorithms. So, but when we don't have an orthodox theology dominant in our culture guiding. And so I'm just curious, do you think the outcome is going to be positive ethically? Especially when you talk about fallen sin and glory and shame.
Yes. There are, I think it's hard to extract yourself from the culture we live in, which has been shaped by Christianity for so many centuries. And so I think a lot of that is accidental in the best way. I think it's just cultural Christianity in a good way too. So I think some of that is right. Like we want to protect people and make people safe and treat people fairly, and those are all really good Christian values as well. And I think that they're going to apply those to AI as well. But as far as like having a worldview that would worry about idolatry, I don't know. They might worry about psychological capture. They might not worry about the heart in the same ways that we might. I don't know. But if you read any of these, like if you look at the AI Safety Institute, they do go through every ethical theory, and they don't downplay like deontological theories or theories that would be more aligned with Christian theories. They even talk about virtue ethics as well. I think most of them tend to be pragmatists. They tend to want to calculate the moral answer based upon competing interests in an economic sense, the way Socrates wanted to, or Mill. That's kind of the way they.
There's an online question from Bob Swanson.
Okay.
Intellectual humility. The ability to say, I don't know, is the hallmark of what we consider an educated person. AI is created and valued for answering questions. Can it be trained to prioritize humility?
I think so. I've looked at this. There are some journal articles where they try to have it say, I don't know. That's difficult because it's going to give you a percentage likelihood that this is what a smart person would say about your question. So it always gives an answer. And that's why we do have a lot of hallucinations still. So I think it can be trained to restrain itself in areas where it doesn't know a lot. But that requires self-reflection on what one knows and where one is getting on thin ice, topics-wise. Like, if that's the Bob Swanson I think it is, I would be really loath to talk about climate or weather. I think he's a very well-trained meteorologist, So I know that I'm on thin ice if I talk about weather. But I'm on thicker ice when I'm talking about, Augustine, right? So I think that's what we have to figure out how to do that. But that's an intellectual and wisdom challenge that I think is probably solvable with an AI. I don't think it would be impossible.
I think you had touched on a little bit of getting into like transhumanism, but
Yeah.
Could you talk more about like that and if it's at tension or is it compatible with Christian views? I know like John Lennox talked about it like 2084. If there's maybe other material you could also link with that.
Yeah, but I did point to that one book. I don't know if it's I think it was in the previous presentation. I can put it back on the screen though. There is one book from an evangelical publisher that does deal with this pretty well. But yeah, I guess here's the thing. If you want to transcend the body, why would you transcend the very thing that allows you to eat the Lord's Supper? The body in which you were baptized, the body that will be united to Christ's body, the body that God doesn't abandon when you die. It remains united to Christ in the grave to be resurrected someday. I mean, this is really an important part of you, And so I think that's a huge part about it. I mean, it even affects the way Christians bury people versus historically cremating. So the Christian concern for the body, I think, is one of the biggest hurdles. The other thing is I just don't think you can get past the fact that we exist as a body-soul nexus, that even the temporary separation of body and soul at death before the resurrection, that God is somehow preserving souls in that situation. But there's no promise to preserve that situation in silicon or in some other kind of substrate in the meantime, or for perpetuity. So I just think you got a lot of problems with even the science of that. I mean, literally, the books from the best transhumanists, they talk about the transporter in Star Trek. It's their biggest example of just instantaneous transmission of human to energy back to human again. And they just sort of wave their hands and get past the continuity problem.
Well, yeah, what was that?
Maybe there's a solution I don't know about.
Yeah. What was the book again?
I'll put it up at the end here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the poems the AI generated was fascinating. I don't think I'm that creative enough, but I was wondering also, like, would it take away human creativity? Like, what if we are relying on, even for work, creating something? The creative, that's God, what He has created us to be creators or created.
Yes, and there's really a debate over whether these systems even could be used whether we could even use the word creativity for what they're doing. So at the university, there's lots of division of sciences, right? So the people in the architecture, art, and design program, they have a very different approach to AI than people in humanities or people in physics or engineering. And so I think one of the biggest concerns of people in the arts is just this zapping taking examples of what humans have done and creating something that looks like it. And they really doubt whether it's truly whether you could truly describe the work as creative or not. After that play, the students said they didn't believe that the robots were really creating art, but the humans on stage were. I don't know. It's a good question. Boy, that's a tough one. I don't know. That's aesthetics. I didn't ever study aesthetics that strongly, but I don't know. I hate to say too much about it without having time to think about the question. Yeah. They're probably better than a lot of pop music, right? So a lot of that is created by committee as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barlow. That's a very wonderful overview and also close-up view of some of the technical details of how to, how AI and how we should engage with that. And just publicly want to make a request or even a challenge to you, think about writing a book on this.
Okay.
Because you seem to have really good understanding as a data scientist and a theologian and a philosopher. You have a lot to contribute.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with that, I would like to welcome those who are here for a buffet lunch. And you can contribute $15 towards that. You can either give it to Micah for on the website, or you can give us cash to me or Galen. So thank you for attending, and we'll be having another Micah forum pretty soon. So just tune in. Thank you. And let's join for lunch after.
Thank you.